Hello, welcome to Living and Learning. I'm Allison Kinnear. Today I am talking about what can we do? We have some we have the flames of racial injustice that has been burning for a very long time in our country, and we have the gasoline that got poured on that fire, which is making which is gathering a lot of attention. It's making people feel more uncomfortable and more aware of those fires that have been burning for a long time. And today I really wanted to speak and talk to those of you who may be new to this, who may even be wondering, why is this blowing up right now? Who may be wondering, why is this an issue? And I'm mostly talking to white people. And so if you're a white person and you're kind of new, maybe you're aware that those fires were burning, but they were kind of in the periphery, kind of on the back burner of your awareness, or maybe you're just kind of awakening to it, or maybe there's questions around it. This is really a talk more for you. Something also that I want to say before I dive into that is you might be wondering, what do I have to like? Why am I talking about this? Who am I to talk about this? And I am not a diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer or specialist. However, I am someone who has been steeped in the diversity, equity, inclusion world since 1994. In 1994, I read Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. It's kind of a classic for understanding white privilege and all the myriad of ways that it shows up in our lives. And from that point forward, that's been a lens that I have both been required to look at my work through, as well as just a general practice of how I view my life. Because what started with white privilege then shifted to, what can I, as a teacher, do to ensure that I am using the most inclusive of language, and using inclusive language not to be politically correct, but rather using inclusive language so that everyone feels included, not excluding by accident. How can I create a classroom environment that is the most inclusive as possible so that truly everyone feels welcome? Um, so these are the lenses that I've had over 20 years of training and practice in implementing in a classroom setting and in a childcare center setting for a really long time. Well, what can I do? How can I be aware of my unconscious biases? How can I be aware of the assumptions that I make and have? How can I be aware of an infrastructure that I may be blind to, and what can I do to work on that so that when my intention of being loving and welcoming of all people is actually felt, that intention and that impact are in alignment. It's not like, well, I intended to be one way, but the impact was exclusionary. It's like, how can we make sure that's in more alignment? And I will tell you, this work is, you hear it a lot, and I feel compelled to say, like, this work is hard. It's difficult, especially when you are it's difficult in general, but it's not difficult because it's hard to understand. Rather, it's difficult because it requires a great deal of curiosity. It's difficult because it's confronting. It's difficult because it's uncomfortable. And it's difficult because it requires a dedication to engaging in the practice of being aware of privilege, aware of unconscious bias, aware of systemic racism, sexism, etc. It requires a lot of thinking about it, but it's not because it's difficult. It's not because it's hard. It's just demanding. And so if being confronted by things, about if being confronted by uncomfortable truths is difficult for you, then this work will be more difficult. And if being confronted by uncomfortable truths is a bit relieving in an odd, like it's still hard, but like also, oh, I'm so grateful that I know this now. If you can approach it with that kind of openness and curiosity, it's less difficult. So, for example, I grew up in a family whose motto was, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. And what that does is that trains people not to receive feedback well, because you view constructive feedback through the lens of not being nice. And I remember having a dear friend of mine who was from France, and she said, that's weird because in my culture, if you care about someone, you give them feedback because it's a gift and you want them to show up in the best way possible. And so if they're doing something that's impeding them from showing up in the best way possible, you give them feedback so that they can show up in the best way possible. So feedback is a gift. And so this is the lens that we can look at the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion through. We can look at it as not nice conversations to have, or we can look at it as a gift that we are being given. And the thing that I think about in all of this, the calling for those of us who are white or white passing, meaning that we come across that when people perceive us, they perceive us as a white person, is that we can very easily, because we are in a place of privilege, we can very easily never think about race until something like this happens in our world. You can ask yourself, when did I first realize I was white? When was that first realization? How often do I have to think about my whiteness? I will tell you from my experience, I don't have to think about my whiteness unless I choose to think about my whiteness, or unless I'm confronted by events like George Floyd and the incident. I'm sorry, I'm losing the names. Anna Cooper in New York City, and all of those other incidents. I don't have to think about my whiteness until I'm confronted by it, unless I choose to. And the reason why this is falling to us as white people, you might have a resistance that's like, what do I have to do? Slavery's been over, or whatever kind of excuse there is, or reasoning or rationale behind it is. The reason why we as white people have to think about this is because the only people who don't really think that racism is that big of a deal are white people. So think about that. The only people who don't think that racism is like really all that big of a deal are white people. And when I think about sexism, because I'm a woman, and when I show up into places, I think about sexism, but for many of the men, they don't think sexism is a problem. But if you've ever been a woman in a room full of men trying to engage in a project or work together, you will know as a woman that sexism absolutely is a problem. But the men don't understand that necessarily because they're not in a position where they have to look at it. They don't have to be confronted. And that doesn't mean they're a bad person or they're wrong. It just means that the soup they've been marinated in and the systems that are set up allows for them not to have to think about it. And those systems and those infrastructures exist also for white people. And so there are so many systems and infrastructures that we don't have to think about. We just simply don't have to think about because our whiteness allows us not to have to think about them. So you might be sitting there going, okay, hopefully you're following along. And hello, Leah. I'm so happy you're here. So what do we do? So this is a question that I'm seeing, and what I love about this time is that I'm seeing so much more awareness, so much more activism from people who I've never seen activism from before, who are going out and saying, I'm new to this and I'm learning, and here's a resource, and it really helped me understand this whole situation better, right? So I love that, the awareness that people are confronting in around racial inequities in all of this. And so you might be going, well, what can I do? I want to do something. What can I do? And my experience is that this kind of work, it has short-term implications, but it also has long-term implications. And what I'm going to talk about is playing that long game. Because the best thing that we can do is learn. We can learn about ourselves. We can learn about the systems that are in place. And by learning about those things, we then get an opportunity to unlearn things about ourselves. So if you've ever sat with that question of, why is all lives matter so wrong to say? If you've wondered that, or what is this white privilege? Or what do you mean systems of oppression? If there's resistance, or if there is like, oh, does this mean everyone's going to shame me and tell me I'm a horrible person? Or any of those kinds of fears or judgments, I encourage you that discomfort that might trigger, or that like, nope, I've got to have my way of thinking about it, and then this other way of thinking about it. If you find yourself wanting to like distance yourself from investigating, the best thing you can do is to lean into that discomfort and get really curious about it. Let me read an article about why Black Lives Matter is what needs to be said and not all lives matter. Let me listen to a TED Talk about white privilege and what that means. Let me have a conversation with someone about systems of oppression and see if I can learn. Because when we can learn, when we can be open to the gift in learning, that's how we make changes. Because once your eyes are open, they don't close again. Once your eyes become open to the real struggles that people are experiencing, then you can't really turn away from it as easily. And when we do that, the other gift that we give is that we get to unlearn patterns and behaviors and language that we have simply absorbed from society. Why do we not want to use the word thugs when it comes to some of the looting and damaging that is happening in our cities? Like, engaging in that learning with curiosity is one of the most powerful things we can do. And it's the first string. And what a lot of people like to do is go, well, no, can't I just, I don't know, post some things on Facebook and have that be enough? Can't I read one article and have that be enough? Can't I donate to one charity and have that be enough? It's both yes and. Yes, do all of those things. Post, read, donate, but also get really curious about yourself and what role you may be playing. How do these articles not pertain to those people out there, but rather, how does this article pertain to me? And what are the transgressions and harm that I maybe have inflicted along the way, unwittingly, unknowingly, unintentionally? And what can I do? What microaggressions, if you've never heard the term microaggressions, I encourage you to look it up. What microaggressions have I engaged in? Because I've engaged in them. I've inflicted harm. I know it. Not intentionally. It was never intentional. But it's what we've absorbed. And so we have to become aware of what have we absorbed, so then we can unlearn and undo those patterns. That is the most powerful thing that you can do. And by the way, I want to, because this is so important, Do not rely upon your black and brown friends to teach you this. This is learning. Yes, do so if you hire them. Pay them money in exchange. Pay money to uh, uh, mentors in diversity, equity, and inclusion who are willing to support people in doing that work. Don't expect that to come to you for free. But rely upon people who do have experiences in this, who maybe are a little ahead of the game or even a lot ahead of the game, and have conversations, have check-ins. I know a dear friend of mine often will text me and say, hey, can I run something by you? I want to post something on social media, but I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it. And then we have these conversations, and it's beautiful. But do the work yourself, or more importantly, engage with other white people, or pay brown and black people to support you in that learning and discovery. It's so important, and there's so many opportunities out there. We just need to find them. But the work, what can you do, is really tied into how can I get curious about myself? How can I get curious about this world that may be new to me? Who can I reach out to support me along the way? And how can I start to dismantle some of the beliefs and systems of oppression that I have unwittingly absorbed? This is our work. This is our most powerful work that we can do. And if you have questions about anything, or if you want to reach out, I'm here. Like I said, I am not a trainer in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know enough to know that I don't know enough. But this is a lens that I have looked through for a very long time now. And it's how I view the world. And so when I think about my coaching practice, or I think about teaching at Seattle Life Coach Training, that's the training that kicks in. How can I be inclusive in my language? What can I do if I do inflict harm? How can I take accountability for those actions? And how can I get curious about how to do better? So that is my living and learning. I charge you to investigate, read, listen, watch, ask questions, reach out. This is not about adding shame upon shame, but this is about leaning into uncomfortable conversations and finding the gifts on the other side. Not only the gifts for you, but the gifts for our other, our black and brown people in our lives, our friends, our family, and our society. There are huge gifts and huge treasures on the other side of that curiosity. Thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful week of living and learning, and I'll see you next week.